Today we're going to be talking about the table saw. So you can see here we have two different table saws in our shop. We're going to talk about each one. We have one set up as a dado and one set up just to make cuts. We'll talk about all the important parts of it and what you need to use and how to use it safely. Alright, so right here is the main box where you turn on the saw and you can get it to run. We're going to start by turning on the on switch. You'll see that you get flashing lights. It will not run until that red light stops flashing. Alright, so that's a sensor that checks a couple things. To turn it on, it says right here you're going to pull to start, which you do, and then you push to stop. Alright, so while that's flashing when you turn it on and you try to start it right away and the blade's still spinning, it won't let you start it right away. So you have to wait till it stops spinning before you start it again. And one nice thing that you have, when I touch the blade, you'll see that that red sensor flashes. So I'm touching the blade right now, and then now I'm off of it, and it goes away. So it senses when I'm there, so it won't start if that red light is flashing. So when you're done with the machine, you want to also turn it off. Okay, another thing you have here is the wheel. This wheel, if you crank it, will move the blade up and down, and the wheel over here to the right is going to change the angle of the blade. So you can see on the front, you can see it goes from 0 to 45, so you can cut up to a 45-degree angle. So to use the table saw properly, again, you usually want to cut with the grain, especially if it's a solid piece of wood. With plywood, you can say this is just plywood, you can do different versions. You can cut it just with the grain or across the grain, as long as there's a substantial amount of material that can go on the fence. If this was only like 3 or 4 inches, I probably wouldn't use it. This is probably the smallest amount that I would use to do a cross cut with the fence. If it's bigger than that, that's fine. Alright, so we have 2 saws in here. This one, again, we're going to change the width of it, so I'm just going to cut it about 4 inches. I'm not going to actually measure, just kind of show you what to do. So, first thing you want to do is set the blade height. So I'm just going to put my material up against where the blade is. There's a, like I showed you before, you're going to twist, and you want the blade to be maybe 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch taller than the material. So you can see that this is just slightly above the material, which is all I need. I'm going to keep it up against the fence. Now you always want to test this. So if this is loose, you can see that this moves a little bit. You don't want that moving. So I'm going to set it up, set it about 3.5 inches here. And then we're going to lock the fence into position. So again, test it out. This doesn't move, we're good. So now I'm going to cut this piece by turning on the machine. I always want to make sure my material is never touching the machine when it starts. And then we push it through. Because this is a small area, I don't want my hand to come up here because it's so close to the blade. So I'm going to use this push block here to help me push it and guide it through the machine. My left hand, when I'm pushing things through, it kind of just sits there as a guide and keeps it on the ground. And I'm more pushing it from the back with my right hand. Now when I got anywhere near the blade, I switched to push it with this, and then I actually kind of help push it along with that. Now this material is finished on both sides, so it's pretty slick, this, and it slides where it should grip a little bit more and be harder to move if you have that. Okay, so material cutting. So for this cut, I am going to do a cross cut. But you can see my board is almost 2 feet long here. That's plenty of room to go along my fence. So if you're using plywood again, something like this, I'm never going to cut across with the fence. But something like this big, I will cut across my fence. I suggest if you're going to make a cross cut, I would just use a miter saw. But let's say you don't have a miter saw, but you do have a table saw. You can make what I have here is a sled. So if I want to take this little cutting board, you can see that the edges is not very straight. This is small enough that I could use on the miter saw. But if you had something that's like too big or 16 inches that can't get cut on miter saw, this is an option that you have. So I'm going to basically line it up with the least amount of wood and material taken off. I do need to reset my blade to the right height. So then now I can push it through the sled to cut that piece. Straight edge on this piece of wood, whereas the side before was like this. So I could flip this down, put it down here, and cut the other side if I need to. Another way to make a crosscut on a table saw is using the miter gauge. Every table saw will come with a miter gauge. You can see it has angles. You can adjust the angle a certain way you want, or you can just keep it at 0 degrees and be able to push it through. So you can put your material up against this and then push it through to make the cut. Now, again, if you have a miter saw, I would use that 100% of the time rather than using this for both angled cuts and cross cuts. So now I'm going to demonstrate what a dado is. Now, if you have a dado stack, it means you're going to basically stack blades on top of each other to create a thicker gap that you're going to cut out of the wood. So this doesn't cut through the wood when you use a dado, it just cuts a gap into the wood. So I have it set up to cut about halfway through. So I'm going to go ahead and push that through and cut it. So even though the blade doesn't go all the way through, I'm never going to keep my hand directly over where the blade is cutting, just in case the wood falls apart or anything like that. I don't ever want to touch that. So you can see I've made a dado. This is basically a groove into the wood. So this one's set up to be a 1/2 inch thick perfectly, so I can put a 1/2 inch piece of wood into it. So if I'm making a bookshelf, I'm making something where I don't want to have screws, I'm using some thinner wood like this, I can put it together. So usually, if I can do it to the right side, it's snug, but I can take it out if I want to. But again, it's snug enough that I can even lift the wood with it. So that's a dado. We'll use it when we make drawers. If we're making something, like I said, like a bookshelf or something that's gonna have, like if I was trying to make a little filing cabinet with a bunch of just different rows that I could put Homer Pippers or something on, this would be a good thing to use with it. All right. Alright, so now we're going to talk about some of the rules that you need to do when you're using the table saw. So first off, you always want to keep your hands at least 4 inches away from the blade. If you have to get your hands closer than that to the blade, you should be holding on to one of these. So this right here, you push it through, you can see that it goes over the blade. When I'm pushing it on the wood, it'll keep it down, prevent kickback or anything like that. Also, you might use a push stick to help push your piece through that you have there. So these are both tools you can use to keep your hands away from the blades so you can operate it safely. Another thing is if I'm going to cut a small piece of wood here, something like this, that the wood might get sandwiched between the blade and the fence and shoot back. It's called kickback. Now if you're holding it down with the push stick or the push block properly, that won't happen. But if it does, you want to make sure that your body is not directly behind the blade, because you don't want anything to get thrown at you from there. So you're going to stand a little bit to the side of the blade on either side. So I usually stand to the left and kind of push it through there. So you don't want to stand directly behind the blade. You make a cut, there's a small little piece there, it's stuck next to the blade, and then you always want to make sure that you either use the push stick or a piece of scrap to get it out of the way, or turn off the saw and wait for the blade to completely stop before using your hand to grab it. Okay, you're also never going to freehand any pieces, so you're never going to push it through without using the fence or a sled or a jig of some sort to make sure you're going directly straight through where the blade is.